Hey everybody, this is Alex from healthhacksreview.com. So this review video is on the whole body vibration machine Hypervibe, and if you haven't heard of that, now you have. And so this company still is based in Australia, and so that's where the core engineers way back when did start to design their machine many years ago. And so they now have divisions in Canada. And again, that was years ago. But basically, they have a division in Canada and they have a division in the United States, which obviously makes their brand available in all these different regions. So, an interesting few things to say about this machine because it does stand out. As I've said in general with this product category, there's really only a handful of brands of whole body vibration machines, be it vertical or pivotal, that are actually unique. Or actually have some custom research and design and engineering and put some real money and a lot of time into designing something different essentially. The other 95% of brands, and if you don't know when you're looking at a brand, chances are it falls in that 95%, are basically the same old rebrands coming from the same three manufacturers in China, and pretty much all those specs on those are about the same ones, and I've talked about that in other videos. And they're usually grossly overpriced after the importing companies resell them. So anyways, Hypervibe, one of these unique companies that is actually, it took them many years, and what they had done specifically to make such a powerful line of machines that were like and similar to the performance rating of $15,000 machines, for example, like the Galileo Fitness, also sold as VibraFlex in the United States, is they really looked at the core mechanisms that they were using in what was considered, and still is kind of considered, the gold standard as far as a pivotal oscillatory machine, Galileo, which is a class 1 medical device, that also they ran some studies with the European Space Agency. Again, they were kind of at the forefront of pushing that type of plate movement years ago, made in Germany. And so they studied that machine, and as you could imagine, it took a while to try to, there's two challenges here. One, of course, this machine that had fantastic performance in terms of G-force, amplitude, speed, had a lot of patents, right, on some of these exclusive technologies that allowed them to achieve this. So they had to do two things, not just create the same results for less money because they wanted to market their machine to the consumer market, but you also can't have patent infringement. So wow, you really have to also find a way around that without pouring in oodles of money. They still did have to invest a lot of money and a lot of years, but they were able to do it. And so the mechanism is very similar to some of their patents in there, because it's pretty much the only way you can achieve a huge amount of amplitude and magnitude, G-force, acceleration force, and frequency coming off of a plate without the whole plate basically falling apart. That's the main challenge. You create too much friction and vibration, which is like the worst thing for any equipment or motor, as we know. And the whole thing is simply shake apart, move across the room. It's dangerous. Shorts out, fries out, in a few months. All these different things when you're dealing with that much movement. So it's actually probably one of the harder things to design. In terms of just health equipment out there. So what they then did, and this is a very important point to go over, is because there's a couple other companies that have done the same thing, is just because something is manufactured per se in China doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, right? It's just right off the bat. I mean, if you're of the mindset that you live in Canada, you live in the United States or whatever, and you want everything you purchase, all the income to stay and make jobs and all income to stay in the United States, then that's one thing. Obviously, you're not going to compromise on your beliefs and your integrity, right? But if you're not in that boat of huge national pride, let's say, with everything that you purchase, then there's not necessarily anything bad per se when it comes to quality about China. Sure, 95% of all the machines they produce are not good. But their facilities there in terms of labor costs in their factories, and it's not just necessarily because they have cheap labor and there's a bunch of slave drivers or anything. I'm not saying that necessarily either. They just have really worked on their infrastructure in factories, the technology that they use. They have all that existing infrastructure there. It's well run. And so a company that could go in there with their own set of engineers and plans, have custom components, grade of parts come in, but basically have it assembled, essentially, in one of their factories as a manufacturer over there. You can save a lot of costs to produce something. But that doesn't necessarily mean, again, that you're compromising on quality. You could actually, hypothetically, theoretically, and this is true for some of the brands, it could actually increase your quality from the and a win-win for the customer from the standpoint of this. It can be a win-win because to produce some types of products and equipment out there with a very high grade of components, custom engineering, okay, to very high grade of performance standards. You know, if you were to produce some of what's produced in China, like a few of these companies in their factories, produced in the United States, you produce in Canada, for example, you'd see a huge increase of costs, which would have to be passed on to the consumer. And I can just tell you right now, just working with people, there is definitely a price threshold for most people that they don't want to spend past a certain amount. Most people aren't going to be very excited about spending an extra $1,000 or $2,000 on a machine. But that's going to be the reality if some of these types of high-performance machines were actually fully manufactured in Canada and the United States. So then you have to ask yourself that question, you know, are you willing right now to spend $1,000 or $2,000 more to have something in that country? Most people, I can tell you, are not, okay? But they are concerned about quality, and that's basically how I'm a guide, how I'm a consultant, and how I help people figure that out. So yeah, it can be very confusing when you hear, okay, Hypervibe's made in a Chinese factory. That factory also makes some other brands that are resold or rebranded that are really poor quality. Yeah, sure, it's coming out of the same manufacturer. Those manufacturers then make a huge percentage of the market. But again, a company can come in to a facility like that with their own engineers, with their own components that they want used, which is important, quality components, custom engineering. And Hypervibe, by the way, is one of the few companies that also then had a couple employees permanently stationed as operation managers, oversight supervisors at the actual manufacturing facility. That is unusual, by the way, and it's a good idea because anybody that knows just kind of dealing with China in terms of business for this type of thing, the best way you can ensure the quality of your product that you're having made over there, essentially, is you really have to have somebody supervising the situation. I'm trying to say that the trust level isn't necessarily like always good. And really, this should be the case probably with any manufacturing facility, even if it was in the United States or Canada. If you're really concerned about maintaining and absolutely making sure that there is a certain uniformity of product quality, you really should have always a supervisor at the actual facility, regardless of where it is. But for sure over there, just because we all know the stories, we know that they will swap something out if nobody's looking to make a better margin. But it's also, they have an employee over there as well to protect patent. And that's actually probably the bigger reason also. And it's very hard when you're dealing with China to reinforce patents. And again, if you know people that have dealt with just business in China, even if you bring over your lawyers, it's so costly. You usually don't even make any headway suing people and for patent infringement and all that kind of stuff in that country. It's just, so you really have to have somebody over there like in the moment saying, you know, you can't do that, and catch them before you know, they took your unique, you know, $1 million in years of technology and started to put it into all of their devices and equipment. So that was really impressed when I actually discovered that. So it's okay. I'm okay with you know, a few of these companies actually making in those facilities. The question is, what are they doing over there? And there's ways, of course, of assessing and backing up the specifications that are then coming out of the engineering, out of the manufacturing facility, and third-party tests to see if, hey, are those specifications really matching up? You can't, as I said in another general education whole body vibration video, with like a Hypervibe, you can't pull off 35 hertz on a machine with 17 G's of force, acceleration force. You can't pull that off and not have the machine fall apart for some period of time without there being great engineering inside of that device. Period. It's like, you can't build a car to have it perform like a Ferrari and not have the quality to be near or as good as a Ferrari, right? You can't fake that. So same thing. You can't really fake these specs as far as when you're actually testing them, if you're actually getting those results with the Hypervibe line. And this brings me to the point of if you didn't watch the other educational videos about fake specifications, keep in mind that 95% of machines out there, at least 85–90% of the time, I've found that the specs are, at least some of the specs on the performance ratings on that particular models of machine are made up, or there's errors, okay, whether it's intentional or not. I always say it's intentional because if you see how much they're jacking up the price based on how much it actually costs them, those price points would be theoretically reflective of if those specs were true, right? Like, again, if we were going to buy a Ferrari, we would expect to see the price tag, $150,000 or whatever the heck it is, right? If we saw a Ferrari, a claim to be a Ferrari, and it was like $25,000, buy a Ferrari, $25,000, we'd say, wait a minute, okay, something's wrong here. This should be like $100,000. I at least know that. I'm not a car enthusiast, but I know that this is really cheap. What's going on here? So same thing in this industry, which is now very confused people. So they say they see a price tag and now they think, oh, well, it must be good quality because it's multi-$1,000s. Not always the case. Usually not the case. So Hypervibe now has 2 different lines in the United States, which is the G10, the G17. Soon going to be a 3rd model. And then in Canada, they still sell their original performance. It's called original performance machine. And so they have 3 now. So if in Canada, you have those 3 options: performance, Hypervibe, G17, and G10. So I'm going to briefly describe each of those in a separate different videos here. But what else can I tell you about the company is they've basically been able to recreate machines that have the performance ratings that match up and fall into the right range that the clinical studies have shown to have efficacy. In other words, if you don't know that word, is have shown to have some positive physiological health benefits that were measurable and significant. And so you need to find a machine or model of machine has the right performance specs that, again, allow you to be in that category. Now, again, I've said, if you're not in that range, I'm talking about of amplitude and g-force, those performance ranges. If you're not within a certain range and experiencing that with your body, I'm not saying 100% you're not going to get any health benefits whatsoever. I don't think that's true. I think you still do get some health benefits for sure, even with the really low g-force machines that are overpriced and not that great quality. You still get them. It's just majorly reduced. We've seen in those studies them literally cite, if your g-force rating is this amount and your speed, you're going to see about 50% as much activation, 50% less activation of muscle spindle cells in different parts of the body. And then these other 95% of lower g-force machines, lower performance machines, are even lower than that. So one would assume it's probably another 30–40%, even less than that 50%. Now you're getting maybe 10, maybe 20% of the benefits if you're using the machine with a lot of different moves. Maybe. It's all a gray area is basically it. So if you're going to spend a few $1,000s on those overpriced machines, I mean, it doesn't make any sense, especially when the price point's very similar if you know the better machines, and then suddenly at least you know that you should be, there's a better assurance that you're going to get certain health benefits that you've heard about, right? So Hypervibe's a good example of that. I will cite a few other brands because there's just very few, Vertical and Pivotal, that get you into that category that are reflective of the studies, have potential efficacy. And this is still all not theoretical. we know how Hypervibe holds up in commercial situations. I always get a lot of data from some of the few people out there that run health clinics, rehabilitation types of centers, training types of centers. And it's interesting to see exactly what brands of machines do they prefer. They definitely always have Hypervibes in there. Holds up commercially for a very, very long time before even needing some fine-tuning or tightening, which they can easily do themselves in heavy commercial settings. A while before they even need to replace a part on there pretty cheap. We know how Hypervibe holds up in commercial settings. So what's interesting is these same few machines that are higher performance machines, coincidentally, all of these commercial types of places, they prefer those same machines because they know that they get the results. They know how they get results when they don't use the machines, what they expect with their clients. And they know how these machines hold up. You can't have a machine that was overinflated $5,000, claimed to be a commercial machine, claimed to have certain specs. When they purchase that machine and they start using it, they're going to very quickly see, just based on results and how the machine holds up, wait a minute, something's wrong. This is not a good machine. This is not what I expected it to be. And they'll never purchase that machine or brand again. So I consistently see in a few of these facilities that have multiple brands of machine, it's the same brands of machine over and over again that they've chosen, that they've figured out on their own. So again, Hypervibe is usually in that category. Always see it in those settings. So now if you're using it at home as a residential user, wow, that's great because we know that it holds up great in commercial settings. We know that it has efficacy. So in a residential setting, it's great because you're going to hardly use the thing compared to the heavy use that it could be getting in some of these other commercial settings. So it's a machine that would last a very, very long time. So a lot of machines, it's not unusual for the 95% cheaper machines out there, cheaper quality, to have something replaced within a year to 2 years, or to just have the timing of the motor go off, or something go wrong, basically, and then have to get a whole other machine again, or pay a lot of money to have to send back to the factory, and it's just complicated. So that's something you want to look into. Buy, invest in something, and have it last. Anyways, thanks for watching. If you have any more questions about Hypervibe in general, the company, let me know. Stay tuned for the other particular breakdown of the other couple models that they have. Thanks.